Who should you bench this week, if you can? Let's jump into start sits for week 2. We obviously saw a lot in week 1, a lot of underperformers almost across the board, and we had some really standout overperformers. But you can't allow that 100% to cloud your judgment when you're deciding who you want to start. It could have just been a hot week. So Sam and I took some time, looked at some defenses, see where they ranked, and took a look at some matchups. And we put together some start sits for week 2. I'm going to kick us off here. We're going to jump into quarterbacks. This goes without saying. I think everyone's probably going to be starting him this week if you can, and that is Baker Mayfield against the Lions. I'm expecting Baker to probably continue what he did last weekend. This week against the Lions defense isn't too great. They're right in the middle of the road. So I think he's going to be a good start no matter what. And then the next one is going to be Anthony Richardson against the Packers. We all saw what Jalen Hurts did to the Packers defense despite the turnovers that he had. He still threw for over 250 yards, and he was one of the few quarterbacks to do that. And Jalen Hurts doesn't throw over 250 yards too frequently. So it was something that really stood out. Packers defense is probably a little bit weaker, and it's prime for Anthony Richardson to probably continue what he was doing, which was hurling the ball downfield, hoping someone catches it when he wasn't running. And these sits, they're going to be obvious, guys, but if you are even considering starting either of these two quarterbacks this week, unless you are in a situation where you just have to, because that's all you got, is Bryce Young. I still think he's going to turn it around, but I need to see it. If you have him on your team, he should not be starting this week. And the other one is just Deshaun Watson. If you have Deshaun Watson, I'd kick him off your team. Throw him as far away as you possibly can and never start him again. He does not look good. I think we have that timer going right now. Just a matter we'd like see Jameis Winston as a starter. Sam will tell you he went and picked him up in a bunch of fantasy leagues like he's going to start him even if he is starting. Go ahead, Sam.
I sure did pick up Jameis Winston, and if you're in a Superflex Dynasty League and you're short on QBs, you should too.
He's not short on QBs. He just did it.
Well, I wanted Jameis Winston. He's going to win me the league. Just you wait. And Kyle's Bryce Young's number one supporter, so for him to say you should sit him, I'm almost closer to cutting him at this point. I don't really roster him in many leagues, but I don't see a bright future there in Carolina.
I mean, he shouldn't be on your roster if you're in redraft anyway.
No, no, he's you're in for a rough year if you have Bryce Young as your starting QB. But kind of a similar to start us off here for our starts at the running back position for week 2. We're going to pick on the Panthers a little bit more here. And our first start is going to be J.K. Dobbins. We just think the Chargers are going to blow out the Panthers. I think it's pretty clear the Panthers are the worst team in the NFL again. And the Chargers are just going to keep running the ball. And Dobbins, after last week, I think is the clear RB1 in that backfield. So expect them to take a lead early and, just give Dobbins enough volume to really put up some big numbers again. The second one here, it's another matchup-based one. We have Brian Robinson for the Commanders here against the Giants. Giants are just an awful team again. They let Aaron Jones and Ty Chandler run all over them last week. I would think that Jaden Daniels and Brian Robinson are probably the two people that you want to target in this Commanders offense for this matchup. But Robinson looks like he has the goal line work there in Washington, and I think he'll get enough volume to be serviceable this week as well. So our last start for running back position for week 2, it's pretty obvious, but it's going to be Kyren Williams against the Cardinals. We saw James Cook have a pretty decent day on the ground against them. Nothing crazy, but he also doesn't really have the goal line role there in Buffalo, so I'd expect Kyren Williams to come in, be utilized pretty heavily against the Cardinals, and he's obviously always pretty good for a touchdown if they get any goal line work in the game. As far as our sits for the running backs go, these two, if you did the 0 RB strategy, they're probably some in your starting lineup for a lot of you, and you might not have great options on your bench. But our first one is Javonte Williams. The entire Broncos offense just looked pretty horrible last week, and the running back room was pretty split between Williams and McLaughlin in terms of who was getting snaps and who was getting carries. I just don't think Javonte Williams has a big enough role in the passing game to really justify a start in the starting roster here, unless he carves out some massive goal line role and the Broncos offense really turns it around. I just don't think he's usable, especially against the Steelers defense this week. Next guy here for our next sit is DeAndre Swift. This is, again, another team. The Bears just did not look great offensively last week. I think the Titans are a pretty good defense, but even with that said, I think it's going to take a little bit for Caleb Williams and the entire Bears offense to really click. I think he might turn it around at some point this season, but I'm going to leave him on my bench until I see that turnaround here.
Yeah, I think all of those are really good plays. Kyron Williams is just a better back than James Cook, too, when it comes down to it. So I think there's a lot of upside there. And I think Robinson, after watching the Giants get shellacked, I think Robinson's just going to run all over them. All right, let's jump into the wide receivers. Two of these are probably people you weren't starting in week one, unless actually probably all three of them are people that you didn't start in week one. I would actually have been surprised with one of them being a maybe. The first one is one we spoke about in our prior video, and that's Jameson Williams. I think he easily moves up into at least a flex spot this week if you can warrant it, and if you need a wide receiver too, I think he's a pretty good, decent wide receiver 2 pick right now coming in against the Bucs. The Bucs defense is ranked 23rd this week. I think there's a lot of upside, and I think Goff's just going to be throwing it all over the field. And Jameson Williams looked like a speed demon, honestly, just running up and down that field, reminiscent of Tyreek Hill, right? Our second pick is Chris Godwin, who looked like a new man in the slot in week one. I'm expecting him to do the same thing. Obviously, these two guys are actually playing each other this week. I'm expecting Godwin to have a really, really good game, as we just picked Baker Mayfield as well. I think he's going to be throwing it all day, and Mike Evans and Godwin are probably going to eat when it comes down to it. But I like Godwin's upside. I think he's going to have a lot of receptions for a decent amount of yards. Then our last one is one that probably no one started at all. There was zero chance. That's Keon Coleman. I think Coleman, he's available in a lot of leagues. I think that there is some solid upside this week. It looked like last week he has the most potential to burst out on that team as a wide receiver 1. He had a pretty good first game, and he's against the Dolphins with the 25th ranked defense this week. I think that there's a very good chance that Coleman could have a really, really good game. Obviously, you always look at Khalil Shakir as another one that you could potentially play this week, but Coleman was out there for almost 20% more of the snaps than Khalil Shakir was. Are we avoiding? I know you guys took him early, probably in the top 3 rounds. I would be benching Marvin Harrison Jr. Even in redraft leagues, I know he was going in those same rounds as he was in dynasty leagues. There's zero chance that I would be starting him this week unless I just had no choice, because he did not. I'm not saying he looked bad, but he's just clearly not in the thick of things. He only had 3 targets, 1 catch. It's not a very great stat line, and I think the Cardinals are still figuring it out. It was clear that there was a lot of checkdowns and that James Conner was getting a lot of volume when it came down to it. So I'd avoid Marvin Harrison Jr. this week, see if he gets it together, see how he does this week, and then play him next week. And lastly, Calvin Ridley. I would definitely be benching Ridley this week against the Jets defense. There's just no scenario where I would warrant starting him. The Tennessee Titans offense did not look great in week 1, which I'm sure everyone was super surprised about. But needless to say, you're going up against the number 1 ranked defense with Levis going into like his 8th start in his career, and Calvin Ridley, who is just not what he was, trying to receive passes from them. And yes, he's a wide receiver 1. Hopkins is clearly still a little bit hobbled on that team. He's going to get volume, but I would not trust him against the Jets at all. Definitely bench him this week if you can.
Yeah, no, I think those are some good call-outs there. In our league, I actually did just bench Calvin Ridley for Jameson Williams. So fingers crossed that one kind of pans out for me here. And I know you mentioned kind of benching Marvin Harrison Jr. against the Rams here. But for our tight ends, we're actually going to be targeting someone else from the Arizona Cardinals offense here. And if you have him, you're starting him anyway. But it's Trey McBride this week. He only put up like 5 catches for about 30 yards last week, so about 8 fantasy points. but the underlying usage was really kind of encouraging to see. He was obviously Kyler Murray's like first read on most plays, and he was just getting most of the targets other than Greg Dortch. And I think we'll see some touchdown production and more yardage there as like the year goes on against lesser opponents in the Bills. And the other tight end that we have as a start for this week is actually who they're playing against. And that's going to be Colby Parkinson on the Rams. This is really a situational one as well, with Puka missing some time due to the knee injury, really leaving only Cooper Kupp and Kyron Williams as the main two weapons in that offense. We know Stafford can support a lot of different weapons that are fantasy relevant. I think there's a chance like Tyler Johnson or Denard Robinson step up, but the guy who I think is the safest bet of that kind of second tier of players would be Colby Parkinson there. I think he will soak up enough targets and catches to be a decent fill-in option for you at tight end if you had someone like Ferguson or Njoku who might be hurt this week.
That and Higbee's out too.
Higbee out as well, and then obviously there's going to be some targets there for Parkinson. And as far as our sit for the tight end position, this is a person I don't think Kyle or I expected to be on our sit list this early into the season before we watched any games. But unfortunately, it's going to be Mark Andrews. If you can bench him, that is, we understand a lot of people are probably not in a position to go out and bench Mark Andrews in deeper leagues. It's just not going to be an option for the most part. But if you can, if you were one of those lucky guys that got likely off the waivers, or if you have, Brock Bowers or Dallas Goedert as your second option, I kind of want to see a second game with the Ravens to see how they're going to utilize Mark Andrews. It looked like he was brought in line to help block a lot, while Likely and Zay Flowers were the short kind of underneath targets for Lamar. Maybe it was the injury, maybe it's a car accident. I'm not really sure. I just want to wait another week and see what happens with his usage to see if he goes back to being that stud tight end we know him as, or if he's maybe fading off into fantasy irrelevance at this point.
Well, you're getting extreme with the irrelevance. All right, guys, that wraps up this week's Start Sit. Definitely let us know what you guys think in the comments, and we will see you next week.